Today we have a special guest, Annette Dickson from Cashflow Mastery, joining us. Annette is a personal finance coach who loves helping people transform their relationship with money into one that serves them for the long term. Her background is in the mortgage and finance industry, setting up a business with her husband in 2003 and building a property portfolio while helping others to do the same. Through her work, it became clear that the dire situation of a lack of financial education that was contributing to people being sick and tired of not living a life of abundance and happiness. Her mission is to educate and empower people to take control of their financial well-being. She does this through her online empowerment program, as well as personal one-to-one coaching. Hi, Annette. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I am excellent. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
That's good. Now, I'm going to jump straight in because you're a finance coach, but I understand there is a difference between financial counseling, financial coaching, and financial planning. Can you explain a little bit about those three different things and what situation someone might come to you for help with finance coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question. So firstly, there may be some generalizations and potential overlaps, but in my experience, the services provide a very distinct difference. So, for example, financial planners most often provide advice to people who've already got money to invest. They're typically already wealthy and they just want an advisor that's going to help them to manage it. So they do this by often placing funds under management, which is typically invested in things like stocks, shares, ETFs. They also advise on superannuation and insurance, such as life insurance and critical illness and all those types of things. And how they charge is they'll typically charge fairly significant fees, and they'll take or they'll take fees from funds under management. So they tend to work on clients who already have a fairly large investable asset base. Whereas a financial counsellor are typically more of a free community service, and they work with people who are at the other end of the spectrum. So these people are in real strife and difficulty when it comes to debt and not able to meet their ongoing expenses and liabilities. So there's a lot of value in this service for people who are in fairly desperate situations and just have that fairly low level of financial literacy. However, it's a little bit like calling the fire brigade, well after the fire has started raging. You know what I mean? Whereas clients who come to Cashflow Mastery for finance coaching want to educate themselves on how to become good with money and want to create wealth. So they're usually sort of the young aspirational professionals, or they're just people who know that they need to make changes. And so my program and my service is more of an education and empowerment program. So I teach people how to make better financial decisions and not get into such difficulties with money. And I find if you teach the basics from the beginning, people have got those skills for life. So we also talk a lot about not just money, but strategy and mindset, because money is actually very emotional. And often it's that very belief system that we hold that keeps us stuck. And people create stories and identities off the back of, conditioning from when we were young, which often doesn't serve us. And so, yes, I do cover debt elimination, as many of us do have consumer debt, and it's quite hard to get by these days as a young person without some sort of consumer debt. But I teach people a formula to eliminate the debt, so they've actually got a structure to work from. And I also teach them the differences between good debt and bad debt. And so obviously bad debt can hold you back, and good debt can actually help you to propel yourself forward financially. And not a lot of people know the differences, but obviously not everyone has debt. So they may be somebody who is just been a little bit frivolous, and they start to realize that they need to rein things in and sort of make some better financial decisions, but they just don't know where to start. So we start at the beginning and teach timeless principles to help them to effectively manage their personal finances. which includes putting a plan together. So it's a bit like saying, well, how are we going to know how to get from A to B unless we've got a map, or unless we look on our phone and look at Google to tell us where to go? We don't know how to get there, and we'll maybe go around in circles. And so this is really a road to help them get from A to B in the sort of shortest time possible. And look, at the end of the day, nobody is going to look after your money and care about it in the same way that you will, right? So unlike a planner, Cashflow Mastery or financial coaching is not a done for you service. You don't come here and say, here's all my money, can you just manage it and just sort it all out? That's not how I roll. I actually educate and empower people so that they can make more informed decisions. So it's more of a hands-on financial literacy and mentoring program, I suppose, if you want to put it into a box. So I'm not affiliated with any sort of investment class as such, but my background, as you mentioned before at the beginning, has been in the mortgage industry and in property. And that's where I've personally done a lot of investing, is in the property space. So just coming back to then the second part of the question, which was in what circumstance would somebody come to see me or come for some help? And as I mentioned, typically they're a sort of a younger professional, so somebody that's got some fairly good disposable income, but seem to be sort of no further along. So they might be either just starting out in their career and they just want to get ahead and know that they don't want to work, that whole 40-40-40 plan. So I don't know if you've heard of 40-40-40, but it's like it's a bit like being entrapped by the job where you're working 40 hours a week for 40 years just to retire with 40% of what you've struggled to live on your whole entire life. Okay, so a lot of people—
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, right. It's not exactly aspirational, especially in today's world. Like generationally, like our parents and our grandparents, certainly they could live off one income. Like my grandparents could live off one income, and you went to work and you had a fairly good life, but that just isn't the case anymore. And we certainly can't expect the government to look after us, even though they like to pretend that they can. But what they're doing is they're expanding the pension age. So we're all looking down the barrel of having to work till we're 70, and then retire on a measly pension. So that's certainly not what I wanted for my life. So and as I say, you can't expect it to rely on them. And even though they reckon that they've got you back and they're going to help, they're actually not, and they're broke. So they can't help, and we can't rely on them. So we need to make decisions for ourselves and be responsible and be like what I call a sovereign individual, which means you're not depending on anybody else. You're depending on yourself, and you're making your own decisions. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. That clears up a fair bit about— I've got to be honest, my brother is a financial planner. And I don't really know what he does. I mean, I know that he manages people's money, but what you've said is a lot of help, because even I think I thought he did a bit of the coaching and stuff as well. And now I'm kind of under the impression that he probably doesn't. And it's more like, yeah, we'll put your money here, here, and here and get you the returns.
Yeah.
So,
it would be good to ask him.
Yeah, I did ask him once when he first graduated uni, I think. I was like, oh, can you plan with our money? And he was like, I can't work miracles, Michelle. Like, well, thank you for your honesty. I will take my $3 over here. So yes, he was pretty upfront about, you're not ready.
yeah, and that's perfect, because for people who aren't ready, that's how I can that's where I can come in and help, with the coaching. Yeah.
And do you have advice, or how can you help those people that just think, I'm not good with money, that's their story for their life? They're never going to be good with money, and they are relying on that pension. Yeah,
look, exactly. And I think we talked about this before in one of our previous conversations, because you're right, I hear this a lot. I'm not good with money, I'm no good with numbers, I'm never going to be wealthy, I'm always broke. And what you've got to do is take a step back and realize that these are just stories, and these are just this is just conditioning that runs, and typically we like to think we're in control, and we go about our daily life, but actually most of this stuff is coming from our subconscious, and it's stuff that we're not really that conscious about because it's running in the background. It's a bit like having a computer that's on all the time and you don't update the software, right? It's just running. And all the stuff, you're still running like Windows 97, or you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
it's just, and then you don't update it, and you sort of think, well, I bought the computer, why should I need to update it? But it's like these programs, they're older, outdated, and they've probably come to you through somebody else. So for example, we're usually a result of our parents, and we grow up watching them and listening to their language, and we take on some of their stuff. I'm not saying we do that in all cases, but a lot of that has come through family dynamics, and it's come through our environment. So when we're going to school, depending on what sort of school we go to, the sort of kids that we hang out with, whether you've come from money, whether you've lived in relative poverty, that will shape your stories, and those stories become like an identity. So it doesn't matter, as I say, whether it's come from school, family, our social environment, our social status, anything that might have, a situation that might have happened to you where you've told yourself, oh, well, I'm never going to be good with money. Maybe you lost a lot of money on an investment, or something happened, or you've just never managed to get it together. So you've told yourself that is now your reality. But what I'm here to tell you is that it doesn't have to necessarily be that way for the future, and we can change that. So it's first of all being aware of what your stories are. And again, in my coaching program, I have a money mindset module, and in there I talk a lot about financial identity and habits. And a lot of the stories that you're running create your identity, right? So you have you have a financial identity, just like you have one in your relationship. You are a certain way in your relationship. You're a certain type of parent. This is how I am as a parent. And what we do is, when we have an identity, our ego does everything it can to defend that identity. So if my identity is that I'll never be good with money, and I'm not good with numbers, I'll continue to run that story because that's who I know that I am when I'm around money. So in a way, it's like a subconscious story that you're telling yourself, and then your ego is keeping you there because it's comfortable, it's what you know. And as soon as you try and challenge that, your ego is just like, whoa, its whole purpose is to protect you and to keep you where you are. So the first thing about this is to understand what your financial identity is, and know that it's just a story, and that it's not necessarily true, and that you can change it. So if you know that, that's a very theoretical thing, then you can go about putting in some things to replace and to create a new story and a new identity. But ultimately, your outcomes, so everything that you've created up until this point today, is a result of your behaviors, which is a result of that identity. So in order to change your outcomes, your identity, it has to be who you become, who you are. Like my financial identity is that I'm good with money, and that I'm good with investments. Yes, I've made decisions and I've lost money. That doesn't make me bad with money. It just means that I've made a couple of mistakes. So what? I can learn from them and I can move forward. But if I haven't made any decision or made any investment, how am I ever going to grow? How am I ever going to learn? And it's not to set, and I think mistakes are a good thing. They're a part of life, and I think they give us really good lessons. But if you don't take action, how are you ever going to have the learning from it? So we don't want to be in that, they talk about fight, flight, or freeze. We don't want to be in that freeze, deer stuck in the headlights. I don't want, and this is what happens when people are maybe quite good with money. They save money, but then they hoard it because they don't want to make the wrong decision.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different money types, and there's lots of different reasons why people do things, but typically it's all coming from conditioning and running that Windows 97 program in your subconscious that's really directing your daily decisions. So it's quite scary when you think of it like that, right?
Yeah. So I've had my own experiences with financial identity. I always was very good with money, and that was my programming. And I was a bit of a financial hoarder for a while. And then just earlier this year, or maybe late last year, because of starting my own new business and everything, things got to the point where I needed to ask my mum to borrow money. And my financial identity then just fell apart. And it's been a bit of work to work back to, no, I am good with money. That was just, that was just circumstances. Yeah. And we can make changes to bring us back to where we were or where we're comfortable. But yeah, it was quite an awakening. And I'm like, oh no, am I bad with money now?
Yeah.
But I had to quite consciously work to, that's not my story. I didn't just become bad with money one night.
Yeah.
And I am still good with money, and I can make it work again for us. So that was
perfect.
Quite eye-opening.
Yeah. It sounds like you were at least aware of it. So that's amazing. And not a lot of people have that awareness. So
no,
kudos to you.
I think because it was, it's always been a strong part of my identity of who I am as a whole, is like, yeah, I'm also very organized, very good with money, very, those things. And to have that very good with money removed for a second, it's like, hang on.
But what's interesting about that too is that sometimes that can also stop people. So the fact that you are good with money and that you are organized probably made it even harder for you to ask your mum when you were in a dire situation, you needed help. Yes. And that can, that kind of pride can also get us stuck, and it can, and like you said, even though you asked your mum for money, it didn't change the story about who you were and that you were good with money. But you probably, it probably took you longer and you deliberated more over it because it was.
I almost let it change that story. I almost let it. And then, don't let it change that story.
Yeah, amazing.
Now, back to your money story. How did you get into this? There was a bit in the bio, but how did you get into finance coaching?
Right. Well, yeah, like you mentioned in my bio, I just, through my work being a mortgage advisor, I just saw so many people who just didn't have it together. And so I probably went above and beyond because I really wanted to help people, and I'd sort of done it myself. I'd come from that. So just rewinding a little bit, I came from a background where I watched my dad budget, and I saw that he was really good with money, and he taught me from an early age the difference between wants and needs, right? It's a fairly basic concept, but and I think it's really good to instill that in our kids and in society, because we're very much I see it, so I want it, and I'm going to have it now.
Yes.
Yes. And that wasn't the case when we were kids. There was no chance, right? So there was, I wouldn't say that we went without anything. We had everything we needed and a few of the wants, right? But when you wanted something that was outside of a need, I really had to work hard to negotiate and really persuade my dad. And so I got good with that persuasion, and it's all a negotiation, right? When you're a kid, it's all about how do you get something you want, but that you haven't got really a cause for why you really need it. So I learned that from a young age, and I knew that if I really wanted something, it couldn't just be a whim. It couldn't just be like, I've seen something and I want it and I just need to have it. And I didn't get huge amounts of pocket money. So when I did get the money, I had to be really mindful about how I spent it. So I was pretty good with it in that sense. And I was always encouraged not to get into debt. And so, at least I came from a family, at least had some money, so that at least when I was starting out, I didn't have to go into huge amounts of debt to get an education and things like that. So I had a fairly fortunate upbringing in that sense. And I had a dad who was willing to support me when I first started investing. So I bought a property with my husband when I was 26. That was the first thing that we did. And whilst I'd already saved, and this comes back to that negotiation, so I'd already saved quite a lot of the deposit through my job, and I just paid myself first, and I put it into a separate account, and I just didn't see the money, and it was like, not negotiable. That is for a property. I'm not spending it on anything, even though all my friends had nice cars and they were going out all the time, they had nice clothes. I didn't have any of that. I was just like, look, I don't care about that stuff. I know that I need to get into the market, and I need to really, and I kind of always wanted to make my dad proud too, and do well with money, because that was the upbringing that I had. So there was a small gap in the deposit, and then that's when I went to my dad. But I don't think if I'd have gone to my dad and said, can you give me the deposit, he wouldn't have said yes. But the fact that I had already saved and had this, I had it all written down, and I kind of came to him with a bit of a plan. You know, I didn't just come and say, hey, I need this much money. I said, look, I've got this much. This is the small gap that I need to cover to get it. And this is what this is what the growth is going to be in the property. This is how much it's going to rent for, blah, blah, blah. And I showed him the whole plan. And I think he was secretly quite impressed. And he said he'd be happy to assist with the remainder of the deposit. So that came back to just learning how to negotiate, how to have your shit together, really. It's what it comes down to, and know that, so you want to back someone who knows what they're doing, and that they're motivated and they're confident and they're driven. And despite the outcome of whether that was going to be a good or a bad investment, he was willing to back me because I'd done all the research, and I put my heart and soul into making this happen.
Yeah.
So we bought that property, and off the back of that property, that was in 2002. Off the back of that, we after it was about 18 months, I think, that the market was, this was up in Queensland, like North Queensland, not North Queensland, North Sunshine Coast. The property market had been doing nothing for so long, and everyone was like, oh, why are you buying in Queensland? We were living in Sydney at the time. And it was like, well, yeah, exactly. It hasn't done anything for 10 years. It's about to go. And sure enough, within 18 months, the property had almost doubled in value. So what we did is we tapped the equity, so you can refinance, tap the equity, and we used that money to buy another property and to set up our business. So yeah, fairly risky, and I'm fairly risk averse. And that was like, back then, that was quite a risk. But I was like, we were in our sort of mid to late 20s. So to me, I didn't really have anything to lose. So that's kind of how we got started in the business. And to have that lump sum of money there to live off, and to, buy equipment for the office and to sort of set it all up, that was quite a risk. But it's like, if we hadn't have bought that property, there's no way we would have been in a position to be able to start our own business, to stop work and then go into, and mortgage broking is a commission-based industry. So there was no paycheck coming in every month. For the first 6 months, we didn't really have an income, hardly anything. So we really had to hustle, to get it going and make it work. So yeah, that's how it started out. So yeah, coming back to the question, and then I just, over those years, I just saw so many people who came to us to say, hey, I want to get into my first home, but they didn't qualify for a number of different various reasons. They might have had a bad credit score, or they might have had too much consumer debt. They might have had, not enough deposit. And there was lots of different things that meant that they weren't ready. So I would say to them, hey, go and do this and this thing, and come back and see me in 6 or 12 months. And then we can definitely look at it. But I didn't really have a mechanism to sort of follow those people up. And, sometimes we'd lose touch, and, they weren't ready, or they didn't do the work. So I thought, really, I need to put a system or some sort of structure in place where I can actually hold people accountable and give them an actual structure and go, right, these are all the things that we need to work on, and hold their hand a little bit, because no one does that. There's no real financial education out there. We don't learn this at school. And unless you're lucky enough to have parents that can teach you and know it themselves, and often they don't, we're just fumbling about. And we all know that if you fumble about with anything, you're not going to get great results.
Yes, it's quite a sore point, I guess, that they don't have financial education of any kind at school. That was all. My mum was the finance person in our house, and she was also always quite upset that there was none of that kind of training in school. And she obviously taught us a lot about money and finances, keeping it in check. But I used to teach my friends, I remember, in high school what I was doing, because where else do you learn?
That's great.
So my friends, we all had part-time jobs, and they'd blow their money, and I'd save my part, and then I'd be able to go out and buy certain things, bigger things than they could. And they'd be like, how? I'm like, well, I've put money away steadily for this. So I was always, teaching people in high school. But if you don't have that friend, where do you learn when you're in high school? Where do you learn all those money skills?
Absolutely.
So, what you're doing is very valuable, believe me. So what is one tip or a bit of advice you can give for people who feel like they're ready for that next step, or they need a bit more help to get to that next step financially, whatever that is for them?
Yeah, okay. I mean, there's a lot of things people can do, but one place I would start is to learn how to do what we call a profit and loss on your personal finances. Now, don't worry about the jargon. Profit and loss simply just means recording your income less your expenses. So this is where people get tripped up a lot. But let's just say you get paid fortnightly. What I would suggest is, just to start with, is to write down what you bring in on a fortnightly basis, so your income into the household. And then for 14 days, write down everything that you spend. All right, just that one exercise to writing it down will give you huge insight into what's going on. Now, obviously, every fortnight is going to be a little bit different, and we get different bills at different times of the year, but it's a really good place to start without it being too overwhelming. Everyone can do it for 14 days. And that gives them that awareness over, okay, what am I bringing in and what's going out? And at the end of the day, we need to know, or what we need to do to be able to invest is we need to be able to be bringing in more than what we're spending, basically. You know, it's not rocket science, and most of us know this, but we don't do it. Or we think, well, we're not doing, we can go for small periods where we don't do it. But if we live our entire life that way, we're going to end up with very horrible outcomes and not sustainable outcomes. And this is how people get into a lot of consumer debt, especially because they start to bridge the gap with credit cards, personal loans, you name it. Someone's got a credit facility and they're willing to give it to you, so you take it. And then before you know it, it's all spiraling out of control. And this is where people start to get unstuck. So the first thing, it sounds really obvious, but the first thing is that we need to live within our means, right? And if we're not, we need to take a look at, okay, there's two things we can do. It's the same for a business. If a business is running at a loss, that business is not going to that's not going to survive. It can't pay its staff, it can't pay its overheads. It's either not bringing in enough money, or its expenses are too high, or a combination of both. So in your personal situation, it's the same thing. So you either need to look at how you can bring more money into the household, and or you need to look at reducing what's going out, those expenses. And the first way you can bring in or reel in your expenses is to look at your discretionary expenses. Obviously, there's not much you can do with your fixed expenses, such as your overheads, like your rent, your mortgage, you know, your water, your electricity, all the things that you need to do to have a roof over your head and food on the table. There's not a lot you can do with those kinds of expenses, but discretionary are all the things, unfortunately, the things that we enjoy, you know, so the going out, the entertainment, the clothes, all those bits and pieces. And we all need to have, you know, we all need to wear clothes and everything like that, but we don't necessarily need 10 pairs of jeans. So it's looking at,
I can attest to that.
we think we do.
If you need 10 pairs of jeans, call me.
Yeah,
I'll help
exactly.
you solve that problem.
Yeah, and we talked about this last time. It's likened to that cupboard where you don't want to look in it because everything's going to fall out. You don't even want to open the door. You just shove everything in there and quickly shut the door. And that's the same analogy with money. You know, everybody's like got all these skeletons in the closet, and they just want to shut the door on it and hope no one looks in there. You know what I mean? And don't worry, like we've all been there. So it's not like you're a bad person and we're judging you and stuff like that. It's not about that. It's about, okay, yes, you haven't necessarily done the right thing up to now that's going to serve you, but you don't know how to change. You don't know what you should be doing. And so when we don't know something, we tend to just avoid it. So that's natural. That's normal. You know, we all do that. So I would just say, so start with that profit and loss, because the other thing about profit and loss is that we'll do it for our business, right? So if you're in business or you know anyone that has a business, their accountant comes in and does it. So they'll do a profit and loss and they'll give you the numbers and say, right, based on this, you owe this much tax and you owe this much GST. And they'll run it through a bit and do your tax return and it's all done and it's great. Yeah, we've got another year till we have to see that guy again. You know what I mean? But nobody does it, and accountants don't help you with that with your personal finances. And I think that it's even more important you do it, because if you are in business, you're doing it to generate a profit so you can have a good life and organize your money at home. But we don't then look at the money at home. So I would start there. I would start with how much are you bringing in as a household and how much is going out and what's the discrepancy. And you start there and you just start getting an idea about where you're spending your money, because most people don't even know. Like if I was to say to people, have a lot of clients that they go, I earn really good money, but there's just never anything left and I don't know where all my money goes. So what we do is in my program is actually set them up with some software that tracks their money. And so there's no hiding, the numbers don't lie. And they go, holy crap, I didn't know that I did this, this, and this. And you know, and at the end of the month, they're actually really, and it's kind of like they've never wanted to look at it, but now they have to. And, you know, it is a bit scary for them at first, but as soon as they get over the shock of it, they then become more in control of it because they can see what's going on and they've got that transparency and that accountability to make some changes.
It does
so I hope
seem,
that helps.
Yeah, it does seem like really basic advice, you know, live below what you earn, but it is so easy to lose sight of it and to start living outside of that. And I've got to say, that's what happened to us, you know, and I know that advice. I know live below what you're earning, but when you're not tracking it, especially for me, my income fluctuates with the business, obviously. So not tracking that and not tracking what you're spending, it's really easy to just go, oh yeah, there's this much in the bank account, that's how much I can spend, when you don't realize that 3 months time you won't have the money to pay a rates bill or something like that. You know, to be able to track it and stay aware of it, and that we've gotten back on track is just really watching and being aware of what's going where, what we're spending each week. So yeah, seems like basic advice, but I can say it's very easy to ignore it, and that's where you'll go off track.
And then from there, what I do with my clients is we set up different accounts for different purposes. So I liken finances to, it sounds a bit loopy, but to like a dog, right? I've got a dog, so I know for a fact that my dog loves to please me, but he needs boundaries, and I have to tell him, no, you've got to sit and stay over there. And it's the same with our money. Like we need boundaries around money. And if we don't have boundaries and different accounts set up for different reasons and know where everything is and what job does this account do? It does one job. This account over here does this other job. And then we put it on autopilot. So everything just hums along and it's just a smooth process. And yet then you're not there every time a bill comes in. You're not there cowling when the postman comes along with, you know, putting letters in your letterbox and you're like, I just don't want to look at that, you know. And we eliminate all of that. We eliminate all that stress because it's unnecessary and it's just through a lack of planning and understanding. And so we get all that sorted, put it on autopilot, and people just like, the relief is just like, oh, you know, the relief off your shoulders is quite huge. And it's not just the relief of it, it's also the stress and the onset of where that stress goes in your life, you know, in your relationships, in your family life, in other areas of your life. You know, that stress that the money causes has a huge knock-on effect to other areas of your life. So once you get your money sorted, you'll be surprised at how well other things can start to become a bit more harmonious.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like the stress that it carries. If you're stressed about the money as well, that can impact everything else, as well as just like having the money to do the things. But that underlying stress that you carry, if you don't have your money under control, can really affect how you interact with everyone and how you go about your day. Is there something that you wish that everybody knew about money?
So money really is simply a method for exchange, and it's exchange for value and energy. That's all it is. So we put this huge meaning on it and make it mean all these things and have all these stories around it. And It's scary, it's this, it's that. But really, it's just like, if I value what you have, I'll give you money in return for those goods and services. And so money shouldn't be our master, and we should not feel enslaved by it. We just need to learn about it, manage it, and respect it. And like I said before, create disciplines and structure for it. So whilst finances are not a conscious being as such, I still liken it to my dog, where it needs boundaries. And also, I want people to know that it's just a tool. And like all tools, ultimately, it's the person operating the tool who controls whether they use it for good or evil. It's not the tool itself.
Yeah. A lot of people do have that fear that if they are rich, or they think that the rich are evil, so if they become rich, then they will be evil too.
Yeah.
And it sounds silly to say it, but that is often an underlying fear, isn't it?
Yeah. But again, that's just a story like we talked about earlier. And also, when we have money, like I said, it's the person that's operating it, and whether they're going to use it for good or evil, however you want to say it. And that comes down to the person, not the actual money itself. Now,
I know there's a lot of excellent money advice out there, but there's also a lot of terrible money advice. So I wanted to ask you, what's the worst money advice you've ever heard, and why was it so terrible?
Do you mean to me personally, or just in general?
Either way, you personally, or like what's a common money tip that you'd like to debunk?
This is quite a difficult one for me, because I think the worst advice is when you go out to a family barbecue and the next door neighbor's brother-in-law's sister had this really bad experience, or on the opposite end of the spectrum did really well with this particular thing, and therefore you've got to do that thing. So I think the worst advice comes from people who have never done what they're advising you to do.
Yeah.
So like I said, usually it's at a friend's place or at a barbecue where people they're all property experts, or this person bought this share and it went up, it 10x'd, and you need to get in, and that whole fear of missing out thing for people, I think is a real big one. And that's where you've got to take the emotion out of it. And that's easy to say because money is very emotional. But you've got to look at who's giving you the advice, what's their story. And just because something worked for someone or it didn't work for someone, that bears no relevance to me whatsoever. So I'm not interested. I'm just, if someone comes to me and says all that, and just, and when we're young, we're impressionable. So we tend to take advice from people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. So, I'd look at where you're getting the advice from and whether it is right for you, because everybody's situation is unique and different. And we're all running different stories and we've all got different capacities. So, and that's why I try to teach timeless principles so that people can use the information to make their own decisions. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think blindly hopping on any money train of any kind of trend without knowing how it works is one of the most dangerous things. Like if people get into shares because their friend or their neighbor had success, or if they get into Bitcoin because somebody else did and it went well for them, or if they ignore those because somebody had a bad experience. I think that's very dangerous to get on board any of that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll find success stories and bad news stories everywhere you look.
Yeah.
So it depends what you're looking for. So again, it comes back to what's on your radar and what is it you're trying to seek out, because we tend to look for evidence to back up what we already believe.
Very true. Very true. And I love books. Do you have any recommendations for money books that people should read?
Yes, I do. And I love books too. And I always recommend, and I would recommend to your audience, that one of the best books ever on personal finances is The Richest Man in Babylon. So it's a small book. I don't have it on my desk, but it's a small, easy read. However, it was written in 1929, so it's got olden day language, which I kind of like. It's quite endearing to me. but it's written in a sort of a story or a parable. So it's it follows this guy along his journey, and the premise of the book is that it has 7 success lessons all intertwined with the story. So it's kind of interesting because it's not just like reading a textbook or a boring sort of book. It's actually got the story that goes behind it. It's written in olden day language, and it's really easy to understand and easy to follow and easy to get the learnings from. So I go into that a lot in my program. I actually dissect the book and I actually elaborate more on the different lessons, and I add my own one at the end, my 8th one. So it's probably one of the easiest books to understand, and it's one of those ones that is timeless. So you can read it now, you could have read it in 1920 or now or in another 100 years, and it was what it's talking about will still be very valid, I think. So the other thing that I do in my program is recommend that people read at least 10 pages of a good book every day. So that becomes a new habit. So we look a lot at habits and disciplines. And I would say that for me, a lot of my education came through, I did a lot of courses and programs, yes, but a lot of it was self-education. So even if you don't like to read a physical book, you can listen on Audible. But the fact is that you're getting the information. So if you drive to work every day, turn your car into a library and listen, turn off the radio. They call that chewing gum for the ears, right? Which I think is a really good analogy because it's just rubbish, right? Yeah. And listen and learn, turn it into your education and learn every time you go out in the car. Like I listen to podcasts in my car, and when I'm at home, I read. And I always try and work through my own advice, which is to read a minimum of 10 pages of good book each day. And on something that you want to learn about, something you want to be proficient in, you've got to put in the time and the effort to learn. And what I love about books is that you're walking in somebody else's shoes, somebody who's been there and done it, and they've been able to write a book on it, and they've usually got there's always a golden nugget in every book. Even if you don't like the entire book, there's usually something in there that you can learn and pick up. In my coaching program, I actually have I encourage people to read a certain number of books throughout the program, and I've named it the Financial Freedom Reading List. All right, so what I've done is I've put together a list of about 10 to 12 books of the top books that I've read over the last 20 years that have made the biggest impact for me financially, and to bring about financial success for me and understanding and education. And these are all, as I say, personally recommended by me, and I've still got these books and I still sometimes read back over them. And to get a copy of the first 5 books I recommend on my financial freedom list, your listeners can actually download this as a free resource from my website on my resources page. So you go to cashflowmastery.com.au/resources, and you'll find the top 5 books as a free download on the financial freedom reading list. So I would suggest, if anyone's interested and wants to get a copy of that, go across there and get onto it.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I personally will be reading through the 5 as well. I think I've probably read most of them because like I said, I love reading, but I think I might need to refresh on most of them. And I think I've told you, my mum has a copy of that Richest Man in Babylon, and I think I've read it, but it would have been like 20 years ago. So I definitely need a refresher on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you'll love it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing lots of tips and secrets with us. Just want to repeat, where can people find you? What's your website and any social media if you have?
Yeah, so cashflowmastery.com.au is my website, and I offer 30-minute free consults for anyone who wants to have a chat about their money situation to see if there's something I can help them with. I'm also on Instagram fairly newly at cashflow_mastery. So please come on there. I do little video snippets and put a few interesting things here and there on there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time today. And yeah, hopefully you'll get a few visitors through to that website because it's full of great information. And we will put the website details in the notes underneath as well.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been awesome to chat with you.
Thank you.